The Secret Garden by Frances Hodgson Burnett was written and published over 100 years ago in 1911. However, the sentiments, themes, and problems discussed throughout the story still ring true today, especially while analyzing the psychological issues and effects the characters deal with throughout the narrative. The book was so popular that not one but two feature films have been adapted from the text into scripts. While both films are also enjoyable and informative to watch, I'm going to be discussing the original source material, the book. If you haven't read the novel, I will give you a brief summary. 10-year-old Mary Lennox lives with her wealthy parents who are quite neglectful and care more about partying than caring for their young daughter. After a large cholera outbreak, Mary is sent back to England to live with her wealthy aunt and uncle after both of her parents die. When Mary moves into Misselthwaite Manor, she finds out that her aunt has died and her uncle is reclusive and depressed. Mary has a hard time adjusting to living in the vast, lonely manor and is not used to the harsh discipline or little control she now has. One day while exploring the mansion, Mary comes across a secret room where she finds a sick boy about her age crying in his bed. This is Colin, her cousin, whom her uncle keeps hidden due to his various illnesses that threaten his health. Meanwhile, Mary and a gardener named Dickon explore the gardens, where they discover a secret garden that is overgrown and dead. While the two work to restore the garden, Mary also begins helping her cousin overcome his fears of leaving his bedroom and persuading him that he is not really sick. After a long, formative winter and spring of gardening, learning about herself, growing up, and making friends, Mary has completed her restoration of the secret garden and wants to bring her cousin outside to show him the beauty of it. Colin, Mary, and Dickon spend the spring enjoying the magic of the garden, and Mary's reclusive uncle is touched that his late wife's garden is restored and that his son seems to be improving.
The secret garden is always open now. Open and awake and alive. If you look the right way, you can see that the whole world is a garden.
A prominent element that I noticed throughout the story was the development of Mary's ID, ego, and superego. ID is the set of uncoordinated instinctual desires. The superego plays the critical and moralizing role, and the ego is the organized, realistic agent that mediates between the instinctual desires of the ID and the critical superego. Throughout the story, we see Mary grappling with her internal needs and learning to deal with them in the context of her surroundings and acquaintances. Early in the story, when Mary still lived in India with her parents, all of her needs were attended to by servants who bathed her, dressed her, and fed her most of her childhood. After she moved back to England, Mary must adapt to her new environment, which is less centered around her. While her basic needs are met, she yearns for love and belonging, the third tier of Maslow's hierarchy. She acts out, throws tantrums, and breaks rules, all in pursuit of achieving acceptance and attention from those around her. In this situation, Mary's ID would be the need to be loved. Her ego would be her tantrums and outbursts instead of just directly communicating her needs, and her superego would be the developing guilt and empathy she feels for her uncle and his staff. While Mary's considered a spoiled child because of her rotten behavior, she quickly adapts to her new environment at Misselthwaite Manor. She learns that the housekeeper, Mrs. Medlock, will not put up with her juvenile behavior, and everyone else follows her rules. She also learns that her uncle is majorly reclusive and sad since his beloved wife died. Mary is forced to adapt to her new life, and this expectation is especially heightened as she is a Victorian child who is trained to be well-mannered. Because her uncle is so reclusive and tends to spend his time alone or traveling, Mary learns to entertain herself by exploring the vast mansion and grounds. Despite being heavily affected by her childhood, Mary is still a child and maintains a sense of adventure, wonder, and pursuit of happiness. Like most adventurous and mischievous types, they are in search of a greater purpose to rededicate their lives to something meaningful. For Mary, this purpose resonates when she discovers the secret garden and begins her journey of replanting and reviving it. As I stated before, Mary drastically changed after she moved to Misselthwaite. In the beginning of the book, we see Mary acting like an adult by way of not showing interest or curiosity in life. However, over the course of the book, we see Mary become more childlike, initiative, and outgoing. So, how did her environment shape this rapid development in her personality? This question and the answer to it is truly what makes the secret garden unique. Mary's environment, generally speaking, did not really change since the death of her parents. She goes from being neglected and ignored by her parents to being neglected and ignored by her uncle. In both situations, Mary's basic needs of food, shelter, and comfort are met, yet she is emotionally neglected and lacks any source of love and care. The difference in environments that initiated Mary's evolution is that her outbursts and tantrums are no longer responded to, and while at Misselthwaite, she was truly alone and forced to entertain herself. This dynamic inspired Mary to change her behavior and ultimately bettered her to be happier and more fulfilled. One of the main contributors to Mary's newfound maturity is the relationship she makes while at Misselthwaite. As I mentioned before, her tantrums are no longer responded to. For the most part, she is under the harsh rule of Mrs. Medlock, and other than her, Mary is left to her own devices. However, she begins to make friends with various staff members. She befriends Martha, a young chambermaid who helps her dress and bathe. She befriends Martha's brother Dickon, who is around her age and works in the garden, and Ben, the resident landscaper. All of these relationships she makes with honest, hardworking, cheerful characters influence her to access her softer, more empathetic side. She grows fond of playing outside. Her crush on Dickon inspires her interest in botany and gardening, and her relationship with Ben fulfills her need for a father figure. Eventually, Mary also discovers her cousin Colin, who is kept hidden within the manor because he is sickly and apparently dying. Colin's arrogant, self-important nature frustrates Mary, but in a way she learns from his actions how unfavorable it is to be so cynical and rude. Their symbiotic relationship improves both of their personalities as Colin becomes more humble, kind, and cared for, while Mary feels connected and cares for her cousin. The two other characters that undergo a radical change in the book are Mary's cousin Colin and her uncle Archie. At first, we as readers, like Mary, know little about Uncle Archie and only get bits and pieces of his lore and history. However, in the beginning of the novel, we gather that he is a grumpy, depressed, and a reclusive man eternally grieving the loss of his beloved wife, Mary's aunt. When he meets Mary for the first time, months after she has moved into the manor, he can hardly look at her, as she resembles his late wife too closely. When we meet Colin for the first time, it is evident that he too is neglected by his father, and similar to Mary, acts in a spoiled, rude way that she finds unattractive and annoying. His apparent illnesses prevent him from leaving his windowless bedroom, and he never makes any attempt to improve himself. As Mary and Colin work to improve his self-esteem and courage to change, she ultimately brings him out of his room and into her secret garden she is fixed with Dickon. The climax of the story occurs when Colin is able to experience the greater life he was shielded from. Mary feels pride and purpose in her creation of the secret garden, and Uncle Archie begins to feel better when he sees the positive effect Mary has on Colin. Each of the characters display a variety of psychological disorders, all of which are addressed and mostly resolved by the end of the story. Our protagonist, Mary, obviously suffers from a variety of disorders as a result of her majorly traumatic childhood. However, given the context and information detailed throughout the book, I will diagnose her with the following psychological disorders. Firstly, anxiety, which is characterized as apprehension, tension, or uneasiness that stems from the anticipation of danger, which may be internal or external. One of the most common psychological disorders among both children and adults is anxiety. Given the circumstances of Mary's early life and her behavior she displays throughout the story, I think that it is fair to assume that she has minor anxiety disorder. Mary also shows symptoms of ADD, attention deficit disorder, which is characterized by excessive difficulties with concentration without the presence of other ADHD symptoms such as excessive impulsiveness or hyperactivity. In both her lives in India and England, she does not receive much attention, care, or love from any of the adults in her life. This reflects in her bad behavior. Her mother always used to chide her for acting out, and she is punished for her behavior while at Misselthwaite. However, as she begins to change and seek validation and purpose in other, healthier ways, the effects of her ADD becomes less prominent. And finally, PTSD, which is a mental health condition that's triggered by a terrifying event, either experiencing it or witnessing it. Mary has a lot of trauma that she evidently has a difficult time coping with. She resorts to less healthy coping mechanisms like being bossy, closed off, and angry. However, as she forms relationships, especially with Martha and Colin, she can finally face the death of her parents and deal with the emotions that come with it. Mary's cousin Colin is also a character who suffers from many prominent psychological disorders. Namely, I would diagnose Colin with attachment disorder, which is characterized as a deep and enduring emotional bond that connects one person to another across time and space. While this condition is quite normal amongst children, Colin has a heightened issue with attachment as a preteen. This stems from his internal longing for his father's attention, causing him to become more attached to the limited figures in his life. He displays this emotional behavior through his scramble for control, whether by bossing around his staff or desperately pleading with Mary and Dickon to visit him often. I would also classify Colin's condition of extreme preoccupying worry about having a medical disease or developing illness is hypochondria. His belief that he is frail and sickly is simply an internal mechanism he's consciously or subconsciously constructed in order to gain sympathy and attention of those around him. I would not directly characterize this as Munchausen by proxy, as Colin is the one who believes he is in fragile health, not directly his caretakers, who are simply doing his bidding. In addition to this, I would diagnose Colin with histrionic personality disorder, or HPD. HPD is a mental health condition marked by unstable emotions, a distorted self-image, and overwhelming desire to be noticed. This aligns with Colin's distinct traits of wanting attention, love, and social interaction. This can be attributed to his closed environment he spent the majority of his childhood in. Colin likely suffers from anxiety as well. Finally, Uncle Archie. Archie lost his beloved wife, Mary's aunt, to childbirth many years ago. Because of this traumatic experience and grief he faces upon losing her, his temperament and behavior indicate that he is enduring a prolonged depression. Major depressive disorder is a mental health condition that causes a persistently low or depressed mood and loss of interest in activities that once brought joy. Uncle Archie is unfortunately a likely sufferer of major depressive disorder as a grieving widow. According to the MHA National Health, profound emotional reactions may occur. These reactions include anxiety attacks, chronic fatigue, depression, and thoughts of suicide. An obsession with decease is also a common reaction to the death. Alright guys, well that concludes today's video. I hope you enjoyed my analysis of the psychological elements of The Secret Garden. If you haven't read the book or at least watched one of the movies, I would definitely encourage you to do so. It's a very good story, and I think it is depressing at times, but I think that the overall message is very uplifting, and it's definitely something you should check out if you haven't already. And I hope that this video provided insight to those of you who have seen the movie or read the book. Um, I honestly prefer the 1996 version. I think it's 1996, but anyway, definitely go check that out if you haven't. And if you enjoyed this video, please feel free to leave a like and subscribe if you are interested in seeing more from me. It's very much appreciated. And I hope you have a good rest of your day. And I will see you next time. Bye, guys.